In this video, I want to discuss questions, but what I'm not giving you is a questioning technique that you can go away and practice. I'm not giving you some sort of questioning framework that you can go and kind of try out on someone else to see if it works or not. Because what I've said is that in the context of a skilled helping relationship, you start out by listening to people, silent listening. It's through this silent listening that you're going to be able to hear what a person's agenda is and then ask relevant questions, asking questions that are appropriate. If you are not able to hear what a person is saying or hear what a person's agenda is through the words that they're saying, it's simply because you're not actively listening or silently listening. You're trying to listen or you're trying to hear. So when you're conversing with someone, the second you start trying is the second that you start being ineffective. All right, there's no room for trying in connecting with people. There's no room for trying in relationships. You can't try to listen to people. You're only either going to listen to people and hear them or not. And that's kind of it. So I want to propose here that great questions have 4 things in common. The first thing they have in common is a clear objective. Now, you're not going to know what the objective of your questioning is in the context of a skilled helping relationship unless you actively listen, unless you listen silently. Because a clear objective for questions will make itself apparent to you as a result of actively listening and following their direction. So bear in mind, someone in a conversation with you will have an agenda. Your agenda initially should be to understand what this agenda is. So any questions that you ask should have the objective of illuminating their agenda. And I'm not getting past agenda here. Agenda. Make their agenda your agenda. All right, so that's the first commonality that all great questions have. The second is they're going to be simple yet challenging. Simple yet challenging. What do you think might happen in some of your relationships if you were to ask simple yet challenging questions? i.e. questions that aren't framed in a really unnecessarily complex or over waffly way. Do you know how sometimes some people don't just ask questions, they tell a story and then assume that, all the listeners would understand what the question is in the midst of the story. Some people are better storytellers than they are question askers. Simple yet challenging questions are easy to understand, but challenging enough to get a thoughtful response, because this is how dialogue commences. When you ask a question that doesn't warrant an automatic answer, but actually more of a reflection, right? Say, for example, if I was to ask you, so, what's the main reason why you're taking this training course? You could give an automatic response. Oh, well, I'm taking this training course because I want to learn how to be a skilled helper and be a professional and make myself out to be a guru and make money. Now, that's like a head response, but it might not necessarily be the real response. So if the question is, what's the real reason you're taking this course? And I've just used my tone to emphasize 1 or 2 words in the question, this might invoke a different response. What's the real reason you're taking this course? And you suddenly enter into reflective state. In the context of a coaching relationship, for example, someone might come and say to their coach, I want to build a really big business. Will you help me please do this? And the facade coach might say, yes, absolutely, I'll help you do that because I have all the answers. But the reflective skilled helper might say, what specifically is it that you want to prioritize building first? Because a business isn't just a one entity that you can build in a day. A business is something that you might build over half a decade or a decade, and a sustainable business anyway. So, The more experience you have in helping people, the more evident these things become. So simple yet challenging questions. The third attribute that great questions have is a positive intention. You're not asking a question to the detriment of the other person or to patronise the other person. You're not putting this other person in a spot by asking a question that you know they don't have the answer to, that's going to make them feel less superior and you more superior. All right? You're not trying to catch them out, but help them to understand where they are and how they can best move forward. The questions that you ask will generally be framed with an intention to help them explore the blind spots. That's it. All right? So have you thought about this? What does a positive outcome look like for you? How specifically is it that you would like to change your life? Because people will generally have very, very broad and very vague goals. I want to change my life. I want to change my career. I have a problem, I'm not fulfilled. Therefore, if I change my career, then I will be fulfilled. And what specifically is it that a new career path would have to contain within it in order for you to find this fulfillment? That is a relatively simple yet challenging question that just wouldn't qualify for an automatic response for them. They just have to stop and think. All right? And when you get that silence after asking a question, you know you've asked a good one. If you get an automatic response after asking a question, then you can know pretty much for certain that you've asked a lazy question, all right, or a false superficial one that warrants a false, superficial, thoughtless response. The fourth attribute of a great question is that it's open. So essentially, which you'll be aware of this, you just don't ask yes or no based questions. So, do you have a goal? Yes. Do you want to pursue some great goals? Yes. Are there some areas of your life that you want to change? Are you ready to pursue some goals? Yes. And as you ask closed questions of this nature, all that you're going to be doing in the back of your mind is rattling through, what's the best next right question that I could ask? Right? So you can actually do yourself a favour by asking open, challenging, but simple, positively framed questions. Because if you do this, then you actually indirectly put all the work on them. All right? When you ask closed questions, lazy questions, you get yes and no answers or minimal responses. But when you ask challenging yet simple questions, then you'll get silence initially. But if you can hold the silence and not speak into the silence by, just to make yourself feel less kind of uncomfortable, then you give them the time and the space that they need to think through what the best possible response is that they need to give to the question that you've asked. Capiche, capuche? So here are 5 influential types of question. Powerful questions lie at the heart of every great helping relationship. By asking thought-provoking questions, you can help people to get clear on their goals, break down internal thought barriers, and test long-held or limiting beliefs. So I've taken that right out of the Skilled Helper book, I think the second section. So here are the 5 influential types of question that you ask. Rapport building. All right, let your questions always be rapport building. For example, how did last week work out for you? How did you find our conversation last week? How was your recent holiday? As an entry point into the conversation, right? Honestly, by the time you're right in the midst of a reflective conversation, don't be asking any rapport questions. 1 minute a person's thinking about, so what are my values and what are my priorities right now? Next minute you're asking them, so how was your holiday last week? Fine. You're going to get a fine response. Rapport building is great for starting a conversation, right? But that's it. You've got to get out of rapport building questions ASAP, as soon as physically possible. The problem with some people is they stay in rapport building questions for too long, which leads some people round in this irrelevant, perpetual cycle of discussion that goes nowhere. So rapport just to warm the conversation up, then you're going right into open questioning. So what's important to you right now? How is it that I could help you today? How specifically do you see that happening? How might I be able to assist you? What are your most important priorities today? Open. And then you go back into that silence again, which some people have massive problems with, just being quiet. All right? Please hear me when I say that being silent is just as powerful as asking the most powerful question in the whole world. Because the second that you shut up and say nothing, you automatically create space for this other person to start thinking about what's true for them. So, when you get good at asking simple yet challenging questions, and then you get even better at being silent automatically afterwards, you can't help but become a massively influential, skilled helper, because you've managed to master the balance of asking powerful questions and then creating space for them to think about what their response must be. So when you get a response through asking an open question, you then go right into clarifying, right? And clarifying questions are just digging a little bit deeper. So an open question might look like, so how is it that I could help you today? Oh, I want to, I've got a problem in my marriage. The clarifying question, so how specifically do you see this problem? When does this problem arrive? Bill, give me some context around this problem. Help me understand it. Can you tell me more about your main motivations? What's your main goal here? And that's it. So through asking open questions and then clarifying, you can really pinpoint what the main goal is or what the main problem is, and you get to know your enemy. You get to know what you're working with. We then have questions of scale. And an example of a scale question can be, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this goal to you right now? Because sometimes people will think that a goal they have in their mind is the main priority, only to later discover that what their goal is currently isn't the main priority, which has actually brought about a huge degree of incongruence and dissatisfaction into their life, which is the source of the main problem. All sounds crazy, but it's true. This is how people process life. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this short-term goal to you? Another example could be, in 10 years from now, what must have happened for your goal to have become a reality? When we ask questions like this, scale, we're getting people to essentially position themselves mentally at some point in the future where they've achieved what they need to achieve in order for their goal to have been fulfilled, or for their problem to now be obsolete. All right, so what must be in place? Essentially, what we're doing here is starting with the end in mind. By repositioning this other person 10 years from now, they don't have the problem anymore. So they can look at right now from an objective standpoint. Does that make sense? So that's scale questions. And again, you can't just go and ask a series or a sequence of scale questions as a technique. It doesn't work like this. Communications, dialogues don't work like this. A dialogue happens when one person responds appropriately to the other, and then the other responds appropriately, and then you respond appropriately, and then two people respond appropriately to each other in a two-way dialogue that is progressive. And that's kind of it. The last influential type of question, solution focused. This might sound simple, all right, but this completely contradicts the majority of forms of therapy out there. I've come across some abstract, whacked out forms of therapy over the last decade since I started teaching this stuff. I've come across cuddle therapy. I even had a conversation with a cuddle therapist once, and I said, so what specifically is it that you aim to achieve through your form of therapy? I've heard responses to give people the sense of security that they need to feel empowered within themselves. So if I could just ask a clarifying question here. So when this other person is in your warm embrace, does the empowerment that they get in the midst of this embrace, is this something they can keep permanently, or do they have to keep on coming back for more of your warm embrace? Is this relationship that you're making available an empowering one, or is it a disempowering one? Are you creating a form of dependency here, or are you empowering this individual to take a greater degree of responsibility for managing their own life? And we know what the answers are. We have tarot card readers. I've come across mystical clown therapists. We've had it all right, where the agenda of certain individuals is not to empower and equip, but it's actually to control, manipulate, and make dependent. All right, come on. Weak people love nothing more than to attempt to manipulate others. Timid people who are small on the inside will often feel better and stronger within themselves when they can position themselves above or lord over others. All right, now unless you view yourself as being small, then you're going to be free to otherwise stand as an equal to someone, all right, which is really all that I'm proposing here. Right? When you have a therapist up here who has all the magical, mystical answers, and someone down here who needs all the answers, you can have all sorts of warped and unhealthy relationships be built. All right? You sometimes get this in parenting relationships. You'll sometimes get this in the context of organizational structure, all right, where some people need to lord over others. But where there is imbalance, there is imbalance. Where there is imbalance, there is mistrust. All right? So if you want there to be trust in the relationship must be one of equality, where one person does not have all the answers, but rather is more vested and interested in understanding the other. When this agenda is in place, then it becomes naturally easier to ask more solution-focused questions. So what is it you actually need in your life right now that's going to enable this problem of yours to go away? And a cuddle's just not going to cut it. All right, dancing around in a clown suit's not going to cut it. And I'm using some extreme examples because there's some extreme people out there offering some whacked out and some absolutely deranged forms of therapy that they would refer to as skilled helping. Remember, 20%, 80%, all right, takes all sorts. So what must happen right away in order for you to start progressing today? So rather than me give you a cuddle, rather than me fix you or be your guru, what is it that you could start doing more of today that's going to enable you to start growing and developing and moving in the direction that you want to be heading in? So from the skilled helper's perspective, the skilled helper becomes more of a conduit of change, not the change maker. And that's the distinction. That is the distinction. Seriously, write that one down, all right? Your opportunity is to become the conduit of change, not the change maker, not the transformative magician or the witch or the wizard who has all the transformative, magical, mystical processes. All right? You're just a conduit who's there to understand, to listen to hear people. So you can identify the blind spots and ask them simple but challenging questions that will enable them to see their blind spots by themselves and identify thus the opportunities that they have for ongoing growth and development. All right, master these things and you're well on your way to becoming a masterful skilled helper.